Margie Agin is a marketing strategist or strategist, tomato, tomato, depending on how you say it, and founder of Centerboard Marketing. She helps B2B tech companies discover what makes them different and the right words to say it, and other things too. But Margie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about brand positioning, market positioning, things like that. But first, you're based in Falls Church, Virginia. Is that right?
Just outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay. So what's one, I guess I'm familiar with Washington, D.C., but I don't think I've been to Falls Church before. What's one cool thing that we should know about Falls Church if we haven't been there?
So it is 2.2 square miles. It's a teeny little city. It's called the City of Falls Church. So it has its own mayor, its own government, right? Its own police force. It's a teeny little, almost feels like a small town.
Is it like one person who's like the sheriff and the mayor?
Well, you do sort of go to get like your driver's license renewed and your dog license renewed. Like the same guy just moves to a different window.
Very convenient.
Yeah. But it's only a couple miles like from Washington, D.C. So you feel the need for a big city. It's right there.
You're out of it. Yeah, you can just go to Falls Church. That's cool. Well, and I always ask the guests that we have on also to share, what's one thing about you that your colleagues or people you work with, clients, may or may not know or might find surprising about you? Does anything come to mind? Put you on the spot.
Okay. Well, my first job out of college was teaching English in Japan.
Cool.
I had studied Japanese in college, Asian studies, liberal arts major, and loved languages. And so I spent some time traveling around Asia and teaching English in Japan. But so they may not know that because that was, many years ago. And it doesn't come up at all in my job today. But in some ways it does, because I sort of act as a translator in many ways. I work with a lot of engineers and developers and, technical subject matter experts who, might as well be speaking a different language from me or most marketers and even from many of the customers that they're trying to serve. So I actually feel like a lot of those skills of like trying to find the meaning when you really only just understand like 60% of what someone is saying.
Right.
And digging for those nuggets, actually, I still use today in my career.
Wow, that's cool. And so what made the switch from Japanese and traveling around to what you do now?
Well, when I came back from Japan, I ended up working for a market research company that helped companies find partners and expand their offices overseas. And we did, the internet was there, but mostly what we relied on was primary source research and talking to people on the phone. So I think I was hired. I had very few skills, right? But I think I certainly had no marketing background. But I was hired because I could speak Japanese. And so
that's a skill. I mean, that's something.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want me reviewing your legal contracts, but I could have conversations with people and talk to them and do research over the phone, right? And at least get through gatekeepers to find the right people. And so I spent about 5 years there and really got grounded in the market research side of marketing. And so I traveled through the kind of different types of marketing jobs over, my career, but there's always been this core theme of talking with people, interviewing people, listening to people. And that's sort of how I ended up kind of blending some of that research background with writing and other types of communication skills that I have that, I kind of pulled together.
Sure.
And then created sort of this, made my own kind of path in that way based on the skills that I developed.
Yeah. Isn't that always the interesting way things end up? You're sort of like you have this sort of maybe sometimes random sort of trajectory that you bring it all together kind of in the end. And then all of a sudden that's your business.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems random at the time. You're not really sure where you're going, but then when you look back, you see the pattern and you go, oh, okay, I was kind of following the things that I knew how to do, that I loved to do, right? They like gave me the excitement that I needed. And I just kind of kept following that path. So, luckily it has worked out and I've been able to pull it together, but I certainly did not know that, when I was starting out.
Sure. Well, and here we are today. We're talking about how a company can develop a positioning in a crowded market. And we're not talking about Ariana Grande's sixth studio album. We're talking about market positionings.
Yeah, we're talking B2B. Mostly my sweet spot is B2B technology.
B2B technology, okay.
I mean, it's positioning is important for any kind of organization, but in a B2B tech world, like, there's just so many companies that sound the same, use a lot of jargon, very complex products, and it is extremely difficult for customers or buyers to sort through all that confusion to really figure out, like, how do I make a choice? How is this company different from that company? And, when do I use one versus the other?
Yeah. Can you define what a positioning is, like, at a pretty practical level? Like, I understand conceptually what it does for a company, but what is it?
Yeah. So I'd say that the key to the word positioning is that it's relative, right?
Okay.
It's how you are positioned relative to other either direct competitors or just alternative types of solutions in your space, right?
Okay.
So what is it about you, your business, or you as a person, right, that is unique to you, that helps customers who are the best fit customers for you find their way to you, so they can kind of self-identify and say, okay, this is a company that works with, people in my industry, people in my type of problem, people that are addressing the same kinds of challenges that I'm addressing. Doesn't necessarily make your company better or worse than the company next door. Just means that they are for different people with different problems, right? Who define themselves in different ways.
So is it the same thing or different when compared to a value proposition?
A value proposition is an expression of that positioning.
Okay.
So, a lot of people, and there's a lot of overlap in jargon in the marketing world as well, right? And different terminology that people throw around. So I look at positioning as sort of internal statements, internal brand development, understanding of who you serve and what makes you special, right? Then when all of that becomes external facing, I look at it more like messaging, right? How do we take what we know to be true and then communicate that with an external audience? And that's where a value proposition can be extremely helpful, because it's kind of a framework to pull together your positioning. A good value proposition will say who you serve, right? How you provide them value that they can't find anywhere else.
Right.
A differentiated value that they can't find anywhere else unless they work with you.
Got it. So then what does the brand do we say brand positioning, or is positioning kind of the right word and then it means all of these things?
For most companies, it means the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, for a company that maybe has multiple products, for example, you might position one product different from another product. One product might be your entry level product, right? That's great for small businesses and people just getting started. And another product might be for a more mature audience that has much more complex, say, IT environments, right? So you could have positioning for different products, but your brand positioning sort of sits on top of that. It's kind of the umbrella positioning that is truly, what is it like to work with your company? What is that experience like? That could be different from any other type of customer journey or customer experience that someone has. And that's part of like your brand personality, your brand identity, that could be true regardless of whether you have product A, product B, or you go out and you merge with another company and suddenly you have product C, right? Your brand can be identifiable, that red thread, through all those different products, but you could certainly have different product positioning depending on where people are and their level of maturity.
Got it. Okay. And what does good look like? I'm sure that there are people do this well and do this poorly. What's the difference?
One common thing that stops people from achieving a really crisp and compelling positioning is the need to sort of serve all markets. There's this fear that if I say, for example, I am a company that serves the small marketing teams in startups, right? That I will turn off anyone who doesn't fit that type of characteristic, right? And what if someone comes along and they have a bunch of money and they want to give me this money, right? I'm not reaching this market. So there's this fear that you're giving up so much by narrowing into a niche.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
yeah. So, and I think that's human. I mean, I have seen that in my own business as well. That's just human nature that, you feel like you'd be giving that up and there's this pressure that, you're going to turn people off. But in fact, actually niching down to a certain type of audience or a certain type of, buyer or a certain type of context actually opens up so much more potential because people start to find themselves, like, as I said before, sort of self-identify and find their way to you. And someone says, oh, what does Matt do? What does that company do? Just like word of mouth, someone could be able to crisply explain, this is a company that does this. They're really great for this kind of person like you, right? And that travels without you in the room. So good looks like when people can say exactly who do you serve and what is the value that you can bring to people. How do they, if they're in a room without you there and their boss says to them, why was this worth the investment? Should we renew for another year? That they would have an answer that you would want them to say in that room. They could be able to say, well, there's nowhere else that we could get answers this quickly if it's a market research firm, right?
Yeah.
Or, solve our technical integration problems with this much accuracy. Like whatever it is that is your special sauce.
Right. So it's really, you're trying to kind of somewhat, in some ways, shrink the pond down a little bit so you can become the biggest fish in that pond, so to speak, because there's just fewer choices when you're that, I guess, differentiated, right?
You would be surprised, actually. There is more than enough market to go around. So there are fewer choices, right? There absolutely are fewer choices and alternatives, but it allows people to very clearly understand the value that you bring to them. And so they're able to internalize it in a way and make it very relevant to them. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about them finding you, but it's more about once they understand what you do, really crystallizing that.
Yeah, it's both. I think it's every point along the buyer's journey. And another piece that I think is what makes, when you have really good positioning, is when your own internal company, the different people that will interact with customers, the marketers, the customer success people, the sales people, right? If you have sales development reps that are on the phone, the website, that all of these touch points are aligned and saying the same thing.
Right.
So when positioning gets out of whack is when, say, the marketing team develops it in a silo and, and says, this is a really good and fun statement, but it doesn't actually ring true, or it's not authentic to the organization, or it simply just doesn't make the jump to the sales team, right? So the marketing team is saying one thing and writing copy for the website, and the sales team is saying another thing, in their pitches. Customers end up getting confused, and lost along the way, and sales, the danger of that is sales stall.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to talk more about like that process and how you navigate that, because this is obviously what you do for other companies, and there's definitely like silos to break. I'm sure there's a lot of pitfalls there. Just kind of getting a better, clearer sense of what a positioning is. I think my last thing is like, is there like an example, or is there a list of questions that get answered? How could I really like look at a model for this?
Yeah, I think there's kind of three different prongs that are part of a research. Let's start with a research phase.
Okay.
The kind of back of the kitchen kind of work that you're going to develop the positioning, right? So one is something that is true to the company itself. That's number one.
Okay.
So internal. The second is competitors or alternatives. What's
So
everybody else doing?
that true
Mhm.
thing, what is an
Yeah.
example of a truth? Does it have to be something
Yeah.
profound?
Let me just mention all three, and then I'll dig
Okay,
into
got it.
each of them
I'll
separately. Does
just
that? No,
listen.
no worries, no worries. I just want to give you kind of the big picture of
Got it.
three, and then the third is customers, right?
Okay.
And what are customers saying?
Got
Okay.
it.
So digging into the first one, what is true to the company? So what I mean by that, there is likely a reason. Let's say the founder is still involved with the company, right? There is likely a reason that that person started the company or that
Mm-hmm.
group of people. They saw something in the market that wasn't right, a gap that they needed to fill, right? And they felt compelled to go start a company to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So there is something that is very authentic and compelling about that origin story. And even if the founder is no longer involved, the company's been around for a while, sometimes that culture piece of it is still an important aspect to what can make a company unique.
Got it.
There could be, I worked with over 50 different companies in my career, and no culture is exactly the same, right?
Sure.
Some people, they say, we bend over backwards for our customers, but only very few companies really, really do. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Are really customer obsessed, are really, integrating the customer into every decision. And those companies that truly do that, they can prove it, right? They are not just saying it, they can prove it. So if that's something that makes your company extremely special, unique in the market, and you've got the proof
Like
of
the
it.
case study or the
Right.
testimonial, for example, or the whatever proof point.
Yeah. Or you can share examples of how you were able to be very transparent with your customers, or work with them to co-create something, whatever it is. If
Yep.
that's the thing that makes you special, then and you can prove it, that's the first step, is
Got it.
knowing who you are, right? Doing that internal work to get everybody aligned in the organization to say, what makes us special? Who are we?
Okay. I'm taking notes, by the way, because
Oh,
I
okay.
need to do this. We need to do this. Might need your help.
Yeah.
Continue.
So there's nothing more fun than this. So, and a lot of things come out of that internal discussion. You find that sometimes people are not aligned, or the people who are in customer support are saying one thing, and the people who are in product development are saying another thing, right? So I always start there, because that is so core to positioning, is really understanding who you are as a company, what you believe, what you stand for.
Yep.
Right? Then we got to say, okay, do we sound like everybody else? Is this the same thing that any other company or close alternative that's in our space would say?
It's our people. That's the difference.
Right, it's our people. there are so many like pat phrases, and depending on your industry, there's tons of, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon for a particular, we focus on digital transformation, right? Or we're in security and we are the number one zero trust provider, right? There are these phrases that every single company is using. And if you use them, you literally sound just like everybody else, right? So
if you use them, you lose them.
Oh,
maybe that's a motto you could use. You could put that on like a clever motivational quote. Something to consider.
Well, so I have had, back when we did a lot of this in-house, like it meaning in the building, internal, right? I have seen war rooms where people put phrases like this up on the wall, so we could have a motivational poster like what you're mentioning.
Whether it motivates them or deters them from using it,
Right. And then the third piece is, what are your customers saying? You want kind of this Venn diagram where whatever you think makes you special is also something that your customers really care about. So we want to hear it in their voice, in their words, right? How they may rank what is important to me. And they sound more like humans, right?
Yeah.
They're expressing, when you talk directly to a customer, you're not trying to feed them the language that you use. You're trying to just listen with open ears and say, all right, can you tell me what are the things you need to get off your whiteboard in the next 60 days, right? Or, when you decided to move forward with a solution like this, what was that conversation like?
Right.
And then you just shut up.
And then let
right?
them
And
talk.
you just
Right.
listen, let them talk. And you'll find that there are things that they say are most important to them. And if you can align even with one or two of those things and say, well, that's great because that's what makes us special, whether it's from a technical perspective or a service perspective, right, experience perspective, then you have alignment.
So I want to make sure I got these. That's great. That makes sense. So the second one, was that about kind of checking with your people and what they, because the first one's about founder and
first
sort of
one is
DNA.
all the internal departments,
Okay.
getting them aligned. Maybe a founder, but it could just be internal.
Whatever the culture's going on there. Okay.
Right. The second one is competitors and taking a look at the landscape to make sure there's some open space, some white space that nobody else is filling.
Got that. So that's more like, let's make sure we're not sounding like everybody else. That's what you're saying. Okay, cool. So number one is like what makes us special from the culture, from the internal perspective. Maybe it's a founder, maybe it's our DNA, maybe it's people that are there now. Number two is looking at competitors, understanding the landscape. Is there open space? And number three is, what are your customers saying? And shutting up and letting them talk. Gosh darn it.
Very well said. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. So you go through this process. So like you said that, you obviously have a process to help people get to this place and sort of to crystallize that. Is that the starting point? And then sort of, can you help me? You don't have to walk through all the steps because it's probably more complex, but what are sort of like the 2 or 3 steps to Valhalla to get to the end there?
So once we get to that point where we've got, then we develop some hypotheses.
You got to start with the research, right? And then
so we start with the research. The internal depends on the size of the company. Could be surveys, a combination of workshops, readouts to let everybody in the organization hear what other people are saying, right? Which can be interesting. You do often get some debate and disagreement, but it's healthy to have that come out early in the process rather than later. So if you have, 2 leaders in the organization that say, no, that's not, I would never describe us that way. You want to know that early.
What do you do when does it ever just not get resolved? Yes. Like, what do you do in that scenario?
Yeah. So ultimately, this internal part of the process before you start talking with the customers, a lot of it is building hypotheses, right? Building assumptions and saying, this is what we know so far, right? So you may come out of that part of the process with like 3 or 4 kind of hypotheses that you want to test. Right. You want to pressure test against the competitors and against the customers. So at that point, you're sort of putting a little flag on it to say, okay, we may have a problem here, but let's go ahead and test both of those things and see what the data shows us.
That's when you kind of really, you eliminate one or maybe combine or figure out that they were both wrong and it
could be. And usually there's some elements of one, versus the other, but that is sort of where and sometimes you need to have hard conversations with a leader, a CEO or a leader to say, you are going to have to make this decision. Some of the people in your organization are disagreeing, but ultimately you have to have the head, the CEOs on board, or the whole thing will fall apart ultimately. Sure. So we need to have that buy-in. So then in terms of pressure testing these hypotheses, there's several different ways that I've gone about it. It depends, again, on sort of the size of the market. I like to do a lot of qualitative interviews. We were kind of giving a glimpse of what that could look like before. Sometimes that could be 10 customers and you start to see patterns. It doesn't have to be 100, or 100,000 customers. It could be, happy customers that you've lost, customers that you wish you had, customers that are in later stages, right? Kind of a mix of different customers, but a structured process and deep kind of in-depth qualitative interviews with those customers. Right. And then we're getting even more narrow. Now we're starting to validate some of our hypotheses. And then at that point, if we kind of turn it to, say, we take this take this positioning that we've developed and we start developing some messaging statements or that value proposition statement.
Got it. And then you get there, you document, present back, and eventually everybody's like, I love it, or I hate it, or it just is who you are.
So one thing that often is the case is that people will love a lot of things in theory.
Okay.
And as a consultant, many consultants kind of stop there, right? They say, congrats, here's our book, here's our binder, you go put it on a shelf somewhere. Where the rubber meets the road is when they actually, I have found, they either see the messaging, they see the positioning come to life as messaging in, say, a sales pitch.
Yep.
Right? A corporate presentation or a sales pitch that the sales team would have to actually deliver to a client. And also on the website, right? When you actually see it crystallized and you see like a new homepage or a new section of the website that describes this positioning, now suddenly it's real.
Right.
And it hits people, it hits all these people that were nodding their heads, it hits them in a different way. And so I recommend particularly the sales deck because it gives the sales team a chance to test this messaging, like get the marbles out of their mouth, right? Actually test it with customers. And as a marketing person, you could be a fly on the wall in some of those sales calls just to listen and see how it's landing.
Well, so you mentioned earlier that especially in the software and technology B2B space, that there's a lot of jargon. So I got to ask you, what's one word or phrase that we should just stop using in the workplace?
Ever changing.
Ever changing.
I feel like the first sentence of everything I read is like, in today's ever changing digital environment.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I just want to go, like cut out that entire first part, that entire sentence.
Let's change it forever so that we never hear ever changing. Ever.
Yes. Let's just accept the fact that everything is changing all the time. We don't need to say it. We don't need to tell people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, where can people, if they want to work with you, so where would they find you?
So Centerboard-Marketing is the website. And then if you want to connect with me directly on LinkedIn, I would love that. Margie Agin. Just shoot me a note.
All right.
Let's connect.
Awesome, Margie. Well, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Go Fungal.